Hey guys, tonight we step into the frozen, shadowy world of medieval winters, where every breath you take clouds the air, and darkness wraps the land in its long, unyielding grip. You trudge through knee-deep snow, the chill gnawing deep into your bones like a persistent, unwelcome guest. Imagine endless nights stretching for what feels like forever, the sun a shy visitor too scared to stay. It's cold, it's bleak, and you probably won't survive this winter without a bit of grit, and maybe some luck. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're cozying up, why not drop your location and local time down in the comments? Let me know where you're tuning in from. It's like a tiny medieval village of viewers gathering around a flickering fire. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are a medieval peasant and it is winter. Not the Instagram filter kind of winter, but the kind where ice bites at exposed skin and your breath freezes mid-air, hanging like a ghost around you. The days are short, sometimes just 6 hours of pale light before the sun ducks below the horizon, plunging you back into darkness. This darkness isn't just literal. It feels like a weight pressing down on your village, a heavy cloak smothering hope. The cold seeps into your tiny hut, curling around your thin blankets and making sleep a luxury rather than a relief. Your life is ruled by the seasons, and winter is the ultimate test. You remember the warm smells of late summer, fresh hay, ripe apples, and the golden sunlight on the wheat fields. But now, those memories feel distant, like tales from another world. With the land asleep beneath a blanket of snow, your survival depends on what you stored away, how well you can keep warm, and your ability to endure the bleakness. Medieval winters were notoriously harsh, especially in northern Europe. Frost could last for months, and rivers sometimes froze solid, cutting off travel and trade. You might think modern heating is overkill, but compared to your smoky fire with barely enough wood, you're practically royalty. Still, the smoke fills your hut, making your eyes sting while you huddle close to the hearth, seeking any warmth you can find. Historians still argue whether the infamous Little Ice Age was already making its mark in your era, or if the cold was more localized and cyclical. Either way, it's brutal. Crops fail more often in these cold spells, and food shortages loom like a hungry wolf. Your daily routine shrinks as the snow covers the fields, and the frost-rigid trees stand like silent sentinels watching over your frozen village. One quirky detail: some peasants swore by carrying a small bundle of wool soaked in vinegar on cold nights to ward off evil spirits said to roam in the darkness. The idea of spirit protection might sound superstitious, but it gave you something to clutch to in the long nights when shadows played tricks on your mind. You are not alone in this frostbitten struggle. Your neighbors share the same hardships, exchanging nods and scarce smiles when the frost bites their noses red. The local lord's castle looms nearby, its stone walls cold and unyielding, a stark contrast to your humble wooden hut. You hear the echo of distant bells, sometimes a signal of danger, sometimes just marking the passing hours in this endless night. In these frozen months, time slows, or maybe it drags like a weary cart stuck in the mud. You might think you'd spend more time indoors, but fuel is scarce and every log burned is a choice between warmth today and possible freezing tomorrow. The cold demands economy in everything: food, fuel, effort. So you wait, you endure, and maybe, just maybe, you dream of spring's soft thaw when the snow melts and the land wakes again. But for now, you face the long winter's chill, silent, dark, and relentless. You wake to the sound of your own stomach growling, again. It's not that you're starving, not quite yet, but hunger has become a steady, nagging companion. The granary has been locked up since November, and by now every sack of grain is a calculation, a gamble. Do you eat enough to stay strong, or stretch it thin and hope for a miracle thaw in February? The harvest was poor this year. You remember the worry starting in early autumn, when the barley came up patchy and the turnips seemed half the size they should be. By winter it was clear, there simply wasn't enough to go around. The village reeve, puffed up in his patched fur cloak, made a great show of recording grain rations in his wooden tally, but you know he's been skimming a little off the top for his own family. Can't blame him, really. Everyone's just trying to survive. You scrape a thin gruel from a blackened pot, barley, dried peas, a pinch of salt if you're lucky. Maybe a scrap of bacon rind floats at the surface like a ghost of meals past. Your teeth ache for something to chew, but there's no meat, no fresh bread, no apples since October. You think longingly of summer feasts, but those memories are wrapped in sunlight and distant laughter. Dangerous indulgences when your belly's empty. Food in winter is about strategy. You've learned to stretch stale bread by soaking it in broth. You chew dried nettle leaves for iron. And you've even nibbled on tree bark once or twice. Birch, mostly. Supposedly it has nutrients. Supposedly. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants routinely experienced famine-level starvation or just chronic undernourishment. Either way, the lines on your hands feel deeper, your ribs a little more visible, your energy flagging like a frayed banner. Still, you go on. The village children, always more honest than their parents, sometimes cry from the hunger. You distract them with games or ghost stories. Once, a neighbor tried feeding her son crow meat, boiled it 3 times to make it tender. He spit it out anyway. You don't blame him, it's stringy and tastes like regret. When things get really bad, the forest starts to look like a pantry. You scavenge for wild roots, mushrooms, though you're careful. Last year someone picked the wrong ones and spent 3 days seeing demons in the rafters. And sometimes even tree moss. There's also pannage, letting your pig roam the woods to eat acorns. But this year, you had to slaughter your pig early. You still have a few slabs salted and hanging from the rafters, but those are for emergencies. You try not to look at them too long. Speaking of salt, it's practically gold. You traded a pair of knitted mittens for a fist-sized chunk, and it sits in a tightly wrapped cloth, only used for preserving meat or salting porridge for sick children. No one wastes salt, not even the reeve. There's one quirky winter tradition you secretly enjoy, the Feast of Fools. Held around January, it's a chaotic, irreverent day when social roles are flipped. The village idiot might be lord for a day, and everyone wears ridiculous costumes parading around like drunk geese. You get to laugh, dance, and, if the church hasn't cracked down too hard, maybe even steal a honey cake. It's a brief rebellion against the hunger and hierarchy. One night of madness before returning to gnawing reality. You try not to think too far ahead. The worst part is knowing there's no cavalry coming. No fresh shipment of grain from the next village. They're in the same miserable boat. No miracle crops in January. Just time, cold, and hope. You ration, you improvise, you survive. And when your stomach growls again, you sigh, wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders, and tell yourself, maybe tomorrow. Because that's what peasants do in winter. You endure, even when the food is gone. You can't help but glance up at the looming shape on the hill, the castle. Its stone walls are half shrouded in mist, but it's always there, a brooding presence watching over your village like a hawk over mice. Some days, you pretend to ignore it. Other days, it's all you can think about. It's not just a building, it's power, cold, heavy, impossible power. It belongs to the Lord who owns the land you till, the hut you sleep in, even the very air you breathe, or so he likes to say. You've only seen him twice, both times from a distance. Once riding past with his falconers, once yelling at the steward about taxes during a harvest gathering. He looked warm, fat, too, like a man who's never known what it feels like to count out your last turnip. The castle isn't always a threat, though. In winter, it's also bizarrely comforting. A stone beast that doesn't move. When wolves are howling and the wind slices through your cottage walls, it's strange to know there's a place up there with roaring hearths and barrels of salted pork. Not for you, of course, but the idea that someone is warm feels almost grounding, like fire exists somewhere. The castle isn't just a house, it's a fortress, a storeroom, a courthouse, and a prison rolled into one, and depending on the mood of the steward, or worse, the Lord himself, it can be your salvation or your ruin. Once a month, you're expected to deliver your dues, a bushel of grain, some firewood, maybe a chicken if your flock hasn't frozen solid. The steward doesn't say thank you. He just ticks your name off a list and throws a suspicious glance at your sack, as if you might be holding out on him, as if you could. Historians still argue whether lords provided meaningful protection during hard winters or simply drained peasant resources under the guise of authority. One thing's certain, you never get to vote on how things are run. You're a body, a shovel, a coin with legs. Still, there are perks to living under castle shadow, if you squint. When bandits raid, the castlemen sometimes ride out to chase them. The guards can bring news from nearby towns, and once, during a brutal freeze, the steward ordered that the village be allowed to gather fallen branches from the Lord's woods without punishment. You remember the collective gasp when the announcement was made. Mercy, like a solar eclipse. Rare, beautiful, and probably bad luck. Inside the castle, life is different. You've heard tales from your cousin, who once worked in the kitchens for a week before being caught stealing a plum. High ceilings, stone corridors, thick tapestries to keep the chill off. The servants have rough hands like yours, but their clothes are cleaner, their food richer. He told you about trenchers, edible bread plates soaked in meat juices. You practically wept hearing about it. But don't get too dreamy. The castle's not a fairy tale. The dungeons are real too. You've heard screams echo across the frozen fields at night. Probably just your imagination. Probably. One quirky detail. Some lords believed having their castle walls whitewashed annually helped reflect bad humors and prevent plague, sort of a medieval deep clean. It didn't work, obviously, but hey, the walls look nice. Occasionally, you're summoned to help with castle tasks, hauling wood, mending fences, or clearing snow from the outer road. You don't get paid, but you do sometimes get stew, thick stew, with actual flavor. You eat it slowly, savoring each bite like it's your last meal. It might be. You once joked that the castle is like the moon, cold, distant, and only noticed when it's full and ominous. Your wife didn't laugh. She knows too well that a poorly timed comment near the steward can land you in the stocks. Still, the castle shapes your winter like the mountains shape the sky. You can't avoid it. You live beneath it, both literally and figuratively. And as you pull your cloak tighter and head toward the commons with your meager sack of barley for dues, you mutter under your breath, hope the fat bastard chokes on a plum. It's a harmless curse, a winter tradition, almost. You pull the hood over your ears and trudge back toward your hut, snow crunching like broken pottery under your boots. If it weren't so cold, the silence might be peaceful. But in winter, quiet isn't calm, it's a warning. The birds are gone, the stream is silent. Even the trees seem to hold their breath. Your hut stands like a half-sunk box, barely visible under a mound of snow. It's nothing fancy, mud walls, a thatched roof, and a crooked chimney that leaks more smoke inside than out. But it's home. For now. Until the next windstorm tries to carry it off like a disgruntled ghost with a grudge. Inside, it's dim, the fire's down to embers, and the warmth is more imagined than real. You duck under the low beams and hang your cloak near the hearth, where it immediately starts to stiffen from ice. Your fingers are numb, your toes a distant memory. Home in winter is about layers. You wrap yourself in wool, fur if you're lucky, and if you're really desperate, a blanket made from stitched rags and old potato sacks. You sleep close to the hearth, often sharing your bedding with a few family members and maybe a chicken or two. Body heat is currency. Personal space? A summer luxury. You lie down on a straw mattress so thin you can feel every floorboard beneath it. The straw is itchy and smells faintly of mildew and goat. You shift, trying to find a comfortable position, but your hip bone keeps arguing with a hidden rock. Historians still argue whether peasants truly felt at home in these huts or merely tolerated them as better than nothing. What's clear is that comfort wasn't the goal. Survival was. A roof that didn't collapse under snow was a blessing. One that didn't leak? Miraculous. A quirky tradition you secretly enjoy happens just before bed. You whisper a short charm over the hearth embers, something you learned from your grandmother. Ashes warm, embers glow, keep out spirits, wind, and snow. It's not officially Christian, but neither was she. And anyway, the priest is 2 villages away and hasn't visited since last Easter. The days blur in here. Light leaks through a slit in the wall during the brief morning, then fades by afternoon. Candles are expensive, so you use rushlights, dried reeds dipped in tallow. They flicker wildly, smell like fried animal, and die faster than your patience. But they're still a luxury. Some nights you just sit in the dark, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks and your neighbor's baby crying through the walls. Sound travels oddly in winter. It's like the cold sharpens everything. Your fears, your aches, your regrets. And yet despite all that, you find ways to cope. You tell stories, long winding tales full of giant saints and clever foxes. You sing sometimes, not well and not loudly, but enough to make the dark seem less smug. And when the fire finally dies and you lie there, curled like a cat in a wool sack, you think about absurd things, like what snow tastes like to a hawk, or whether spring will ever remember your name. Sleep comes fitfully. Dreams drift like snowflakes, quiet, strange, gone before you can hold on to them. You wake often to cough, to feed the fire, to check that the roof hasn't collapsed under another snowfall, sometimes just to make sure you're still alive. This is home in winter, not warm, not dry, not even safe sometimes, but yours. And when the morning creaks open again, you rise, wrap your feet in cloth, and face another day in the great frostbitten game of staying alive. Morning again. Not that you can tell by the light, just a vague blue seep around the doorframe. But your bones know, they creak with it. You sit up slowly, brushing hay from your sleeve, and peer outside. Snow. Again. Of course. You've got work to do. Doesn't matter that it's freezing. Doesn't matter that your fingers are still swollen from yesterday. A peasant's winter schedule is not blank. It's just different. The land sleeps, but you don't get that luxury. The animals come first. You head out to the shed, where the cow is snorting clouds into the air like a tired dragon. She's grumpy, standing in a pile of half-frozen dung, her breath rising like steam off a kettle. You whisper to her, same as always, "Still here, old girl. Still here." She blinks at you with those giant sad eyes and swats you with her tail. Feeding her means cutting into your hay supply, which is always tighter than you'd like. You reach for the pitchfork and start scooping. Outside, the chickens are barely moving, hunched together like a feathered lump of regret. You toss them a few crumbs and mutter, "Don't die yet." Winter chores are an odd mix of monotony and danger. You fix fences that no one is trying to climb. You sweep snow from roofs so they don't cave in. You mend tools by firelight, carve new handles, patch old buckets. You even dig trenches to drain melting snow, even though, in January, that feels like wishful thinking. But idle hands are dangerous hands. That's what your mother used to say, and she was right. When you're not busy, the cold finds its way inside your thoughts. You start noticing how quiet it is, how alone you are, how thin your children have gotten. Some days you get sent to help neighbors, splitting logs, fetching water from the frozen stream, repairing someone's collapsed chimney. It's a kind of bartering, really, labor for labor. Everyone knows that if one hut falls apart, the rest are next. The village is only as strong as its weakest roof. One particularly strange task is the midwinter bog patrol. Sounds heroic, but mostly it's you and two others poking around the edge of the marsh with sticks, making sure no animals or people have fallen through thin ice. Last year, old Gerwin went missing during a fog. They found his boot in April. Just one. Historians still argue whether communal labor in peasant villages was truly cooperative or quietly coerced by local authorities. But out here, in the cold, you don't have time for theories. You help because no one survives alone. There's also the matter of keeping the firewood stocked. You've chopped so much this month you're convinced your right arm is now a part tree, but it has to be done. The fire isn't just warmth, it's life. Let it go out and the hut turns to stone. You've taken to stacking kindling in patterns just to keep it interesting. Last week you made a log pyramid, it collapsed, you cursed. But for a moment you felt creative. One quirky winter superstition you practice, though you'd never admit it, is burying a slice of bread near the hearth to feed the spirits of the house. Your grandfather swore by it, said the cold was a demon, and this was the bribe. It's probably nonsense. Probably. You try to keep a routine, wake, feed, fix, help, repeat. The days are short, but somehow still feel long, and when you finally sit by the fire with a steaming bowl of turnip mash, it feels like a feast, even if it tastes like sadness seasoned with smoke. You look over at your wife, wrapped in layers like a reluctant cabbage, darning a sock for the 100th time. Your son snores softly in the corner, mouth open, dreaming of apples. Maybe. You don't talk much these days. Words waste breath. But when your eyes meet, there's an understanding. We made it another day. That's enough. You stir the embers. Tomorrow will be more of the same. But tomorrow, you'll still be here. You wake with a jolt. The hut is darker than usual, and for a moment you wonder if the fire went out completely. Then comes the sound, soft at first, then growing, of sleet pounding the roof. Not snow, not rain, sleet, the worst of both worlds. It leaks through gaps in the thatch and slides down your neck like a wet finger from the underworld. You groan and crawl out from under the shared blanket. Today is market day. Normally, that means a bit of travel, a bit of bargaining, and, if you're lucky, a hot drink and a scandalous rumor. But in winter, it means trudging through ankle-deep slush with frozen goods that might not make it to the square intact. You bundle yourself like a wool-wrapped turnip and check your pack. Dried herbs, a skein of thread your wife spun, a cracked egg tucked in straw. You're hoping it doesn't freeze solid. And a carved wooden spoon that looks more like a ladle. You sigh, it'll have to do. The road to market isn't a road so much as a suggestion. In winter, it's a slippery mess of ice, mud, and occasional animal remains. But it's the only way to trade, to hear news, to feel, just briefly, like the outside world still exists. You pass other peasants as you go. Some nod, others keep their heads down. No one speaks much. Speech is for warm rooms and full bellies. The market itself is a chaotic blend of desperation and stubborn cheer. Stalls lean under snow-weighted canopies, fires burn low in pitiful braziers, and every third vendor is coughing. Still, the atmosphere is something close to lively. Someone's playing a lute, badly, but it helps. You try to trade the spoon. The man laughs and offers you a moldy apple. You trade it instead for a flint shard. Not useful today, but maybe next week. Your wife's herbs fetch slightly better. Someone thinks they'll cure chilblains. You don't argue. Historians still argue whether medieval markets acted more as economic hubs or essential social lifelines for isolated rural people. To you, it's simple. It's both. You come to barter, sure, but you also come to remember what faces look like in torchlight instead of firelight. There's a friar selling dubious blessings. You pay him 2 turnip coins to bless your chickens. He touches your brow too, unasked. You let it go. It's been a long winter, and a sprinkle of holy water feels oddly comforting, even if it smells like vinegar. You spot a rare treat, cheese. A wedge the color of regret, but it's cheese nonetheless. You trade your flint shard for it. Probably overpaid, don't care. Cheese. While browsing, you hear talk of an early thaw. That makes your chest tighten, not with hope, but dread. An early thaw can lead to floods. Crops confused by warm spells can die early, and pests return. Always, the pests. One quirky thing you overhear. Someone claims the local baron has started sleeping in a bed lined with badger pelts to absorb the winter spirits. It's likely nonsense, but now you can't stop picturing it. You buy a few essentials, salt, a bit of lard, 1 candle. You eye the meat stall but walk away. Not today. Before heading home, you stand by a brazier and warm your hands. Another man joins you and shares a story about wolves dragging off a shepherd's cloak while he slept. You laugh politely. He's missing 2 fingers. The walk home is worse. Wind picks up. Your cheese freezes solid. You slip twice. At one point, you curse the road, the sky, and your left boot for existing, but you make it. Back at the hut, your family gathers around to inspect your haul. Your daughter is delighted by the candle. You light it that night, just because. As the sleet hammers down again, you wrap yourself tight and whisper to the flickering flame, "Still here." The candle flickers back. The next morning, your joints feel like old door hinges. Every movement a creak, a groan, a polite protest. You stretch beneath the blanket, barely warmer than the air outside it, and wonder, not for the first time, what it must be like to sleep in a real bed. Not just a heap of straw and sheep-warmed breath, but something wooden, sturdy, even soft. You rise, and today is different. It's not a chore day, not a market day, but a summons day. The steward of the local castle has sent for workers. Again. You've been picked? Again. You grumble as you pack what little you need. A crust of bread, your knife, a bit of cloth wrapped around your hands to keep the skin from splitting. You mutter a few words to your wife. Mostly noises, honestly, and she gives you the same half-smile she always does. The one that means, try not to come back with someone else's disease. The walk to the castle takes a couple of hours. Your village sits like a wart on the edge of the Lord's land, far enough away to ignore, but close enough to pull from when needed. Today, it's repairs, masonry. You've never officially learned it, but you've stacked enough stone in your life to pretend. The castle rises over the trees like a giant stone shrug. It's not majestic, it's just there, cold, gray, stubborn, like winter itself grew tired and decided to live somewhere. Once inside the outer bailey, you join a group of equally miserable men, all hunched and coughing. A guard barks something you don't catch, probably about tools or pace or looking less like you've been kicked by a mule. You get assigned to the wall repairs. You resist the urge to ask which wall, since all of them look equally miserable. There's a rhythm to castle labor: lift, haul, stack, curse, repeat. The stones are heavy and the mortar freezes if you pause too long. Still, it's work, which means it's food. You get a midday meal, barley porridge, barely warm, served in a cracked bowl. One man jokes that it tastes better frozen. You all laugh, and it's the first time anyone smiled since the rooster crowed. Historians still argue whether forced labor like this was technically voluntary under feudal obligations or more of a polite form of extortion. You don't argue, you just eat your porridge. The castle is a strange place in winter. The Lord's chambers are heated, of course. Roaring fires, thick tapestries, and fur throws, but the servants' quarters are no better than your hut. Maybe worse. You pass one poor kitchen maid trying to thaw a goose with her bare hands. She looks like she's on the verge of tears, or murder. Hard to tell. One quirky fact you learned today: apparently the castle's latrine chute is clogged, again. They assign a boy to chip away at the ice plug with a stick. You decide then and there that whatever your job is, it could be worse. At one point, you're called inside the main hall to move benches. It's warmer there. You hesitate for just a second, savoring the heat like a thief in a gold vault. Then the steward glares at you, and you get moving. Inside the hall, things look lavish. Not beautiful exactly, but overwhelming. Animal skins on the walls, iron candelabras, a tapestry depicting some glorious battle that probably never happened. You wonder if they've ever eaten a rat here, or slept with 3 other people just to keep their kidneys from freezing. On the way out, you spot a bowl of apples, real ones, red, shiny, probably from last season's best crop. You think about grabbing one just to feel wild, but you don't. You like your fingers and your head. By late afternoon, your hands are stiff and your back aches, but you've earned your bread, literally. You're handed a loaf, slightly stale, and a coin you'll probably never spend. Still, it feels like something. The walk home is slower. You pause by a stream, half frozen and eerily quiet, and catch your reflection in a patch of ice-free water. You look like someone carved a scarecrow from anxiety and named it after a cough. But when you step inside the hut again and hand the bread to your wife, she smiles for real this time. Your daughter dances a little in her seat. Your son reaches for the crust. You may be tired, sore, and smelling faintly of castle goose, but you made it. You worked the Lord's wall, avoided the cursed latrine post, and returned home in one piece. You stretch out by the fire, muscles humming like frostbitten bees, and breathe deep. Tomorrow will bring new tasks, new aches, new reasons to question your life choices. But for tonight, you're here, you're warm, and you have half a loaf of bread. Not bad, really. You're up before the sun again, not that it's much of a race. In winter, the sun sleeps in and sulks most of the day. You roll out of the straw pile and try not to wake your son, who's snoring with the conviction of someone who hasn't yet known back pain. Today isn't about work, not exactly. It's about faith. It's a feast day, or at least what passes for one. The church bell rings from the far end of the village, its clang dull and mournful in the icy air. You wrap your shawl tighter and gather with your family outside the hut. Everyone's heading to the chapel, a squat little stone building that smells perpetually of damp wool and confession. Going to Mass in winter is less about spiritual hunger and more about collective obligation. Nobody really wants to freeze their soul off on a wooden pew, but no one dares skip it either. God, after all, is watching, probably through a frost-covered window. Inside, it's dim and smoky. The priest is already muttering Latin, steam puffing from his mouth like he's arguing with a ghost. The incense smells nice, though. Better than your neighbor Gerald, who clearly hasn't bathed since Michaelmas. The sermon is about endurance, about patience, about God's mysterious ways. You nod solemnly while trying to count how many mice are visible near the altar. 3, possibly 4. It's hard to tell. One may be a clump of fur masquerading as divine presence. After Mass, there's a gathering in the yard. It's less about religious celebration and more about catching up. You hear news from nearby villages. One lost a barn to fire. Another reports wolves circling the goat pens. Nothing good, but it's something to talk about. Historians still argue whether these church gatherings were more about community building or moral surveillance. You lean toward both. Sure, it's nice to see your cousin, but you're also very aware that Sister Agnes is watching everyone like a hawk in a wimple. There's food today, sort of. Everyone contributes a little, pooling together what scraps they can spare. You brought a turnip. You receive a boiled egg in return, possibly the finest swap of your week. You also hear about a strange miracle in the next village over. Apparently, someone's cheese wheel bled red during Mass. The priest called it divine. The villagers called it terrifying. You call it probably a beet leak, but you keep that opinion to yourself. Later, there's a procession. Children carry candles, which drip wax all over their fingers while they try not to cry. A small statue of the Virgin is pulled along on a sled covered in sheep fleece. You follow quietly, whispering the prayers you remember, humming the ones you don't. Your daughter asks why the Virgin always looks so sad. You tell her it's probably the weather. Afterwards, you walk home through slush and silence. There's a strange stillness to the village on feast days, a quiet that hangs heavy like everyone's holding their breath for something holy, or maybe just hoping for a warmer wind. Back at the hut, you carve your egg into thirds and pretend it's meat. Your wife slices the turnip into something resembling a soup. You eat slowly, reverently, as if pretending to enjoy it will summon flavor. Later that night, your wife pulls out the bundle of wax stubs you've saved. She melts them down in a small clay dish and fashions a new, stubby candle. It's barely the length of your finger, but it flickers with stubborn optimism. You all sit in silence, watching it burn. One tiny light in all the cold. A quirky superstition floats back to you. Some say if your candle crackles during prayer, it means the devil is near. Yours hisses softly. Your daughter claps and says, "He's probably cold too." You go to sleep with that thought, oddly comforting. Even devils must shiver. The next morning arrives like a wet cough. Outside, the snow has turned to sleet again, and the sky wears the kind of gray that makes you question whether it's still morning or already tomorrow. You blink away sleep, stretch your arms over your head, and hear a satisfying pop from somewhere near your spine. Congratulations, you're officially old. Today, you're doing something you actually enjoy. Well, enjoy might be a stretch, but it beats hauling stone or listening to Gerald's theories about goose dreams. You're repairing tools. You set up outside, under the overhang near the hut's entrance where the sleet can only partially ruin your fingers. A wooden bench serves as your workstation. You've gathered broken hose, dull knives, a wooden rake that looks like it lost a fight with a bear, and, your personal favorite, a scythe so blunt it couldn't intimidate butter. You get to work with your whetstone and a few handmade clamps. Sharpening is soothing. It gives your mind something small to focus on. Angle, pressure, rhythm. It's one of the few things you can control in a world that mostly treats you like moss growing on a damp log. Your son watches, fascinated, asking every 5 minutes if he can touch the scythe yet. You tell him he can touch it when he grows a beard. He seems offended. He's 6. While working, you hum an old song, a grain-threshing tune your mother sang when you were small. You don't remember all the words, but the rhythm's still in your bones. That, and the memory of her clapping the beat on her knees, smiling like it was midsummer even when it was snowing sideways. Midway through, your neighbor Hob ambles over. He brings a sickle that's more rust than blade and a bottle of something clear that smells suspiciously like regret. He offers you a sip. You accept. It burns like justice. As you scrape rust off the sickle, Hob shares the latest scandal. Apparently, one of the village hens laid an egg with 2 yolks in the face of a saint. You ask which saint. He says, the one with the beard. That narrows it down not at all. Historians still argue whether these peasant beliefs in signs and omens were genuine religious conviction or just creative ways to make sense of an unpredictable world. To you, they're both. When the weather kills your wheat and your cousin gets struck by lightning twice in 1 week, you start looking for patterns too. You finish repairing Hobbs' sickle and wave him off. Your son immediately begins begging again to touch the scythe. You let him hold it, just the handle, and tell him this is a serious tool, meant for harvest. He nods solemnly, like you just handed him the sword of kings. Your daughter brings out a broken spoon, wood cracked right down the middle. You sigh but fix it anyway. Some tools just deserve a second chance. Like people, like that rake you plan to give a new life as firewood. As you work, you realize something. Tool repairs are your version of storytelling. Each nick, each groove in the metal, each re-wrapped grip tells you where that object has been, which harvests it helped gather, which winters it endured, which hands held it before yours. One quirky belief you remember. Some say that if a knife breaks while cutting bread, it means someone in the house will marry soon. You look down at the cracked spoon and wonder if it means someone will elope with a turnip. The superstitions aren't always clear. By sundown, your fingers ache, and your bench is covered in wood shavings, metal dust, and pride. You've sharpened 5 blades, patched 2 handles, and possibly invented a new tool out of 2 broken ones and some picket string. You're calling it a shovel claw. Its purpose is still evolving. That night, your wife runs her fingers over the mended kitchen knife and nods with approval. That's her version of saying thank you. She also hands you the bigger chunk of boiled parsnip. You're touched. You also wish it were pork. As you settle down under the covers, your son whispers, "Can I fix tools too?" You tell him yes someday. Then you add, "If you're lucky, you'll inherit the shovel claw." He grins like you've promised him a dragon. You close your eyes and drift off, not to the sound of sleet or coughing, but to the memory of a whetstone scraping across steel, slow and steady. In a world full of broken things, today you mended something, and that feels a little like power. You wake to a noise. Not the usual sounds, wind, chickens, or your wife muttering about your snoring. This is a different kind of clatter. Rhythmic, hollow, like boots on frozen ground. Then comes the horn. Short, blunt, not the kind that means celebration, but the kind that means something's wrong. You bolt upright. Your son's already awake, peeking out through a crack in the wooden shutter. You follow his gaze, and there they are. Men on horseback, cloaks fluttering like angry wings. The reeve and 2 armed guards. You groan. Tax day. They don't say it's a tax. They call it a levy, a collection, a seasonal obligation. But the result's the same. Something of yours is leaving and not coming back. The reeve strides into the village square with the flair of someone who's never had chilblains. He holds a scroll like it's on fire and reads names like a man listing debts owed by fate itself. Yours is on the list. Of course it is. You gather what you have, some dried peas, a length of spun wool, a clay jug of questionable ale. It's not much, but it's honest. Or you line up with the others, watching your neighbors hand over goods with dead eyes and polite shrugs. One woman tries to argue. She says the grain was meant for her sick mother. The guard doesn't care. The mother probably doesn't either. She's been dead 3 winters. You hand over your goods with a nod that's 40% respect and 60% survival instinct. The reeve makes a note. Doesn't even look at you. Your background noise to him. A beard attached to a turnip. Historians still argue whether these rural levies were fair contributions to the greater feudal structure or just localized robbery dressed in parchment. You have your theory. You call it theft with a receipt. But it isn't just goods this time. The guards announce they need 2 boys to help dig a drainage trench by the river. Your son hides behind your leg. He's too young. This time. You squeeze his shoulder anyway, just in case he needs to remember what bravery felt like on a random Tuesday. After the collectors leave, the village exhales all at once, like a bellows that's lost the will to puff. People grumble. Someone throws a rock into the fire out of spite. It hisses and does absolutely nothing, which, fittingly, is how most people feel about the reeve. You return to your hut with less than you started the day with. Again, but at least your son is still with you, and you still have your shovel claw. To lift spirits, the village elder suggests a game of knucklebones. It's the medieval equivalent of dice, using sheep bones instead of cubes. You join, partly for distraction, partly because it's one of the few legal vices left. You lose 3 rounds in a row. Your son wins twice and brags about it all through dinner, boiled cabbage, and stale rye. While you chew, you recall a quirky tax story. In one village, a man tried to pay his yearly tithe in frogs, claimed they were local delicacies. The church accepted them. No one ever talked about it again, probably for the best. That night, you lie in bed, staring at the rafters, wondering how much longer winter will drag on. Your wife asks, "Do you think we'll have enough to pay the next levy?" You answer with silence, the only truthful answer. Outside, the wind howls like a wolf with something to prove. You close your eyes and try to sleep, but part of you stays awake, listening for more hooves, more horns, more demands. Because in this world, the snow may bury your crops, but it's the taxes that bury your hope. You wake to warmth, not real warmth, don't get too excited, just less cold. A faint softness in the air that hints at change. The kind of day where the frost doesn't bite so hard, where your breath still shows but no longer looks offended to exist. Could it be a false spring? You step outside and blink at the sky. There's color in it, actual blue. You rub your eyes, half convinced it's a hallucination brought on by too many boiled onions. But no, it's real. And it does something to the village. People smile. Not big, toothy grins, but subtle upturns of the mouth, like their faces are remembering how. With the sudden gift of tolerable weather, the village stirs into action. Repairs are made, tools come out. You take the opportunity to check your roof. Some of the thatch blew off during a recent storm. You climb up, straw bundle in hand, cursing every slip and every splinter. While you're up there, you spy the castle in the distance. The Lord's keep, perched smugly atop the hill. It watches the village like a cat watches a mouse, bored, but interested if the mouse does anything too clever. Inside that stone giant, a whole different world exists. And today, rumors swirl about it like chimney smoke. Word has it there's a feast being prepared, a real one. Meat, wine, dancers, music. You hear about it from a shepherd who heard it from a tanner, who heard it from a monk's cousin's dog. The usual source chain. Historians still argue whether peasants were entirely excluded from such events, or occasionally allowed in as servants, musicians, or, if lucky, entertainment. You don't expect an invitation, but you do expect leftovers to trickle down through the pecking order like cold gravy. You've been to the castle once before, years ago, when they needed bodies to dig a new drainage ditch around the moat. You remember the size of the doors, taller than two men, and the odd silence inside, like even the air had been trained not to speak out of turn. Today, your son begs you to take him close just to look. He's never seen the castle up close, only from afar, drawn in the dirt with a stick. You agree. It's not like you're doing anything better than worrying in circles, so you go, just to the edge of the outer wall. You don't cross the line. That line's invisible, but very real, the line between peasant curiosity and trespassing. Guards don't like curiosity. It makes them itchy. But from this distance, your son can marvel at the battlements, the glint of iron in the sun, the flutter of banners embroidered with the Lord's crest, a lion eating a hawk, or maybe kissing it. Medieval art isn't known for clarity. A quirky tale surfaces in your memory. One lord once filled his moat with wine for a wedding. It turned sour within hours and killed 12 ducks. Still, the guests loved it. You and your son head back before anyone gets the wrong idea. On the way, you pass by a group of traveling performers, rare visitors in the cold season. They're setting up a small stage near the village square. There's a man in a red hat juggling wooden spoons, a woman tuning a lute that's seen better centuries, and a boy with painted cheeks practicing cartwheels in mud. This is an event, capital E. Everyone gathers to watch. The performance is chaotic and lovely. Jokes about monks, slapstick tumbles, a morality play featuring a devil who speaks in a voice that sounds suspiciously like your neighbor Gerald. It's funny, if only because laughter feels like forbidden fruit in winter. You trade one of your last carrots for a sweet bun from the performer's cart. You give it to your son. He eats it like it's been blessed by every saint in Christendom. Back home, the sun sets a little later than usual. You notice, everyone does. The chickens roost half an hour later and someone says, "Maybe the cold's finally had enough of us." It's said like a prayer, or a bribe. That night, your wife strokes your hand and murmurs, "Maybe it's turning." You nod, don't want to say it out loud, you might scare it away. But deep down, you wonder, was that blue sky a fluke, or the first thread of spring tugging gently at winter's heavy sleeve? Either way, you sleep easier, just a little. You wake to mud, not the fresh, squelchy kind you'd get in spring, but the kind that smells like regret and wet socks. The snow has mostly melted, leaving behind a sticky mess that sucks at your boots with every step. Your village has turned into a slow-moving swamp, and your patience isn't much better. Today, the work is all about roads and drainage. The village elders have decided that if you can't keep water out, you might as well control where it pools. You join a group armed with shovels, wooden boards, and what passes for engineering knowledge in the Middle Ages. You trudge to the lowest part of the path, where water gathers like it's auditioning for a role in a swamp monster movie. There's a collective groan when someone suggests digging a ditch deeper than usual. It means more work and more exposure to the cold mud that seeps through even the thickest woolen socks. You start digging. The earth is a reluctant partner, clinging to your tools, mocking your efforts with stubborn roots and stones. Your muscles ache quickly, but you push on. Someone hums an old work song to keep spirits up, and soon enough, everyone joins in. A slow, steady rhythm that matches the slap of shovels. A quirky fact you recall: medieval engineers sometimes used crushed eggshells mixed into mortar to strengthen castle walls. If you ever thought your mud pie skills were pointless, think again. It's the little things. Halfway through the afternoon, the reeve arrives. He's inspecting the work, or at least pretending to. His horse stomps impatiently nearby. He asks if the ditch will keep the water away from the granary. You nod, remembering last year's flood that turned stored grain into mushy soup. Historians still argue whether such communal labor was voluntary or forced, and if voluntary was just a polite word for "because the Lord said so." You suspect the latter, but the community aspect does create a strange bond. Mud and misery shared somehow soften the blow. By late afternoon, the ditch looks promising, deep enough to channel the worst runoff, but shallow enough not to collapse. You lean on your shovel and watch as the sun fights through clouds, casting golden light on the muddy mess. It almost looks beautiful. Almost. Back at the hut, your son asks if he can help dig tomorrow. You smile and say yes, warning him to keep his boots dry if possible. He grins, ready for the challenge. Kids never understand that keep dry is more wish than plan. Your wife serves stew, thick with root vegetables and bits of preserved meat that are more chewy than tasty. You eat in near silence, tired but satisfied. Outside, the rain starts again, tapping on the roof like a metronome set to grumble. As you settle down, you think about the roads. How even now, centuries later, people still battle mud and weather in pretty much the same way. Some things never change. The mud sticks, the water flows, and you dig. Tonight, you fall asleep dreaming of dry paths and sun-warmed earth. You wake to a different sound today. Not the usual wind or dripping rain, but the sharp clang of metal on metal, the blacksmith at work. The rhythmic hammering echoes across the village like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. It's a small comfort, the familiar sound of someone shaping iron, turning raw metal into tools, nails, and maybe even a new horseshoe. You make your way to the smithy, where smoke curls from the chimney and the heat hits you like a warm slap. The blacksmith, a burly man named Jorgen, is busy forging a plowshare. Sparks fly like tiny stars as his hammer strikes. He grunts with each blow, focused, as if the fate of the world depends on that single piece of iron. You watch for a moment, fascinated by the transformation. It's magic, really. Fire and force turning cold ore into something useful. You remember the first time you held a horseshoe your father made, feeling the weight of generations in that simple arc of metal. Nearby, the village children gather, wide-eyed, watching the smithy's apprentice struggle to light the bellows. The apprentice is a scrawny boy, barely taller than your son, but full of determination. The blacksmith cracks a rare smile and hands him a small hammer, showing him how to tap gently, rhythmically. Apprenticeships are long and hard, but at least they're not standing knee-deep in mud. Historians still argue whether the blacksmith's role was purely functional or held a near mystical significance in village life. Some say smiths were seen as wielders of fire's secret power, close to magic. Others think it was just because they could fix your broken plow and keep you fed. You're inclined to believe both. A quirky story pops into your head. Once, a smith was accused of witchcraft because his forge fire never went out, even in the rain. He proved his innocence by making a sword that cut through a locked door. His neighbors were impressed, if a little confused about whether to fear or befriend him. You chat with Jorgen briefly, trading news and jokes about the weather. He tells you the iron came from a mine a day's ride away, expensive, rare, and worth every coin. You nod, thinking how fortunate you are to have skilled hands nearby. Tools and weapons can mean the difference between survival and starvation. Later, you return home carrying a small iron nail Jorgen gave you, something to fix a loose floorboard. It feels like a treasure. Your son asks what it is and you explain. His eyes light up. "It's magic," he says. You laugh and tell him magic comes in many forms, sometimes in fire, sometimes in mud, and sometimes in a tiny piece of iron. As night falls, you sit by the hearth, the nail in your pocket and the memory of hammering ringing softly in your ears. You think about the strength in creation, the power in making things whole again, no matter how broken they've been. And maybe, just maybe, there's a little magic in that after all. You wake to an eerie silence. No birds chirping, no dogs barking, just a heavy quiet that settles over the village, like a thick fog, the kind of quiet that makes you check twice if you're still breathing. You step outside and see the sky, a blanket of gray clouds hanging low, threatening more snow or rain. It's the kind of day when even the wind seems too tired to bother. The villagers move slowly, like shadows pulling themselves along. Everyone is on edge. Rumors have been swirling that the Lord's castle is preparing for something big. A muster of men, a call to arms, maybe a war, or worse, a tax hike disguised as a defense levy. Your stomach tightens at the thought. You join a small group gathering near the well, exchanging whispers and sideways glances. No one wants to admit fear, but it's there, lurking under the surface, a sense that the fragile peace you've known might shatter any day now. Historians still argue whether the medieval peasantry had real political awareness or were simply pawns in the Lord's game. You figure it doesn't matter. Fear feels the same whether you understand the chessboard or not. To distract from the dread, you recall a quirky medieval custom. During times of war threat, villagers sometimes held mock battles with wooden swords and makeshift armor. Part practice, part ceremony, and part excuse to get drunk. You wish you had a wooden sword. You'd give the castle guards a run for their money. Your son tries to cheer you up by pretending to be a knight, brandishing a stick like a lance. You smile despite yourself and declare him Sir Muddy Paws, protector of the realm and the muddy paths. He bows with exaggerated grace, then charges at a pile of hay, knocking it over with a triumphant laugh. Later, as the sun tries to pierce the cloud cover, a messenger arrives, breathless and mud-spattered. The news is short and sharp. The Lord has called for able-bodied men to prepare for potential conscription, not just soldiers, but laborers to build fortifications. Your name is on the list. You swallow hard, thinking of your wife, your son, and the months ahead. How do you prepare for a winter of war? How do you fight battles you didn't choose? The village elder speaks softly at the evening gathering. We endure. We survive. We find warmth in each other. It sounds like a prayer and a promise. That night, you lie awake, listening for the sounds of soldiers assembling, for the inevitable footsteps on your doorstep. The quiet outside is heavy, but inside, your heart pounds loudly enough to drown it out. In these long winters between snow and shadow, hope is the hardest thing to hold on to, but also the most precious. You wake to a faint light, the kind that doesn't shout but whispers, a soft promise of change. It filters through the cracks in your wooden walls, painting everything with gentle gold. You stretch, feeling the slow return of warmth not just outside, but inside you. The long winter is ending. Outside, the village stirs differently today. There's a quiet excitement, like a held breath finally released. People emerge from their homes, faces flushed from cold but bright with relief. Children race barefoot through puddles, splashing like little wild things reclaiming their kingdom. You walk to the fields, now muddy and soft beneath your boots. The earth smells rich and alive, promising new life after months of frost and struggle. You kneel and run your hands through the soil, imagining the seeds you'll plant come spring, barley, oats, peas. The cycle will begin anew. The castle stands in the distance, no longer a looming shadow but part of the landscape, touched by the morning sun. You think about the winter's hardships, cold nights, empty stomachs, endless toil, and realize how much has been endured, how much survived. A quirky thought crosses your mind. Peasants sometimes celebrated the first thaw by throwing mud at each other, a messy ritual meant to chase away winter's grip. You laugh softly, remembering your son's muddy face from yesterday. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants saw the changing seasons as a sacred cycle or just a relentless grind. You know it's both, a mix of hardship and hope, fear and faith. As the day unfolds, you gather with neighbors to repair fences, mend tools, and share stories of winter's trials. Laughter bubbles up between tasks, fragile but fierce. Your wife brings out honeyed bread, a rare treat saved for such moments. You savor it slowly, grateful for sweetness after months of bitter. Your son runs to you, his eyes shining with unspoken dreams. As evening falls, you sit by the fire, the air filled with the soft hum of contentment. The long winter is behind you, but its lessons remain: resilience, community, and the quiet power of enduring. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Wind down. The night deepens around you, gentle and slow like a sigh. Outside, the village rests, blanketed by the fading chill, wrapped in quiet. You feel your body soften, your mind drift, floating between memories of cold and the warmth that follows. Every hardship, every frozen breath, every muddy step has led to this moment, the soft turning of the seasons, the promise of new beginnings. You are part of this endless cycle, connected to the land, the people, the stories that weave through time like a comforting thread. Breathe out slowly, feel the weight of the day lift away. Let the quiet fill you, calm and steady. The snow will melt, the crops will grow, and the world will turn, steady and sure. Rest now, knowing that resilience lives in you, in the earth beneath your feet, and in the stories whispered by the wind. Sleep well, wrapped in the warmth of survival and hope. Sweet dreams.